usual. So the Board of Directors acknowledges that the University of Waterloo is on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our organization operates on the Haldeman Tract, land promised to the Six Nations, which includes 6 miles of each side of the Grand River. So before we go on to agenda approval, there are a few things I want to say, as well as a couple changes to the agenda that I thought should be made. So first things with the agenda, we will be moving, unless there's reason not to, moving advocacy position statements into consent. So that's item 5.2. I think we've had comments on officer compensation, which makes me believe that even though that was initially going to be moved into consent, we will keep that on just for that discussion. So the only thing that will be moved into consent that wasn't there before is the advocacy position statements. I do also have a couple remarks that I want to make before we kind of approve the agenda and move forward. So first of all, I do want to say we did a pretty good job last meeting of maintaining order. So I was very happy to see that. And I do hope that we can kind of continue in that direction. I will say we did continue to have a few issues last time of kind of circular debate. That is also my problem. So I will try and improve on that as well. But I'd like to see some help from the directors to try and maintain new points when we're having discussion. But I guess the goal for this meeting would be to have a little bit more input from some of the members of board that kind of usually discuss less at the board meetings. It does not necessarily imply that you don't do work outside of the board meetings, but I'd like to hear some more kind of across the board discussion of these board meetings. So I'd hope to hear some more from those people. I will also say, because this is a mistake that was made last time on my part, because I forgot to announce it beforehand, but the general practice when we're coming out of confidential session will be to kind of announce the final vote tallies at the very end of confidential, unless there's good reason during confidential not to do so. But when we're talking about final votes on a motion, unless there's good reason not to, we will be announcing at least the final vote tally. Are there any comments on any of those things? Or are we good to go? Okay, perfect. So, if there's no disagreements, we will say that agenda is approved on consent. Does anyone object?
It's amended.
As amended, yes, thank you. Good catch. Does anyone object to the agenda as amended? Nope. Perfect. Are there any conflict of interest declarations for today? Oh, and thank you, Mohammed, for joining. Any conflict of interest?
Apologies for lateness.
It's okay. Thank you for turning your camera on. Seeing none, we will be moving on to consent, which once again includes 5.2 as well. Does anyone object to the consent agenda? Perfect. Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved.
Yeah, all he needs to say is with the consensus of the board, the consent agenda is approved.
Yes.
And you don't need to ask for a mover and a second.
Okay, perfect. So the magic words, which are, what are they again?
With the consensus of the board.
With the consensus of the board, the agenda is.
The consent agenda is approved, or the items for consent are approved.
Thank you. We will just go as if I said that. Next time I will get it myself. So we'll be moving on. We have no presentations today, no unfinished business. So we will be moving on to new business, starting with 4.1, which is recommendations from governance committee. 5.1, thank you. So the first motion we have here is the work plan for governance reform. And with Mohammed being the chair there, he's the assumed mover. So Mohammed, would you like to kind of speak to this and kind of explain what's going on?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you. First off, apologies for the short lateness to everybody. Essentially, the motion at hand is a work plan. It's, we do it generally on all committee fronts, but in this case, it's because of the governance reform that we discussed and was brought in at the 2024 AMM. It's essentially attempts to phase out the aspects of what we intend to achieve throughout the next year or so, and help us achieve the deadline of generating recommendations to put forward at the next AMM in regards to changing and reviewing our governance structure. It's split up into a 6-phase approach. I would like to make one friendly amendment. I'm gonna put in the change in the chat box. Essentially, during governance committee, a change was suggested, which was to minimize the reliance on election turnout as a key metric or an indicator of success for gov reform. And I think that was the consensus. We made the change, but there were 2 instances where that was mentioned. And so I'm amending the very last line on the work plan to say phase 6, post AMM review, perform roundtables, and the governance committee reform review. I'm putting it in chat as well.
Thank you. So I will ask, we'll go to Samir in a second, but I assume we'll be asking the same question. It's a kind of question to governance. Since this is a motion that's coming out of committee, is that really something that can be amended on friendly? Though I understand that Mohammed is technically the mover here anyway. So is that? Yes, it did not get a seconder as well. But that's my main question, and then we'll go on to the seconding thing.
Okay, to answer your question
Yes.
altogether. The board always has the right. Remember, committees are making recommendations. The discussion could be different at the board table, so the board does have the ability to make the changes.
Okay.
And I think in this case, because it was something, it just got missed putting it in, so it's a friendly amendment that the chair of the governance committee can make, and you probably have enough governance people around.
Yes.
Anyway, that they would object if it's not the right thing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we'll go to Samir, then I'm going to ask for a seconder. So
One question, I guess. Is this one big motion or these 4 individual motions we're voting on? Because it's 5.1 together, or are we voting on each of the subcategories?
so
There is to vote on each of the subcategories.
Yeah.
It's not, they're not all lumped.
I just want to confirm that. I was a little confused.
so so it's not 5.1, it's 5.1i, correct?
Okay.
That's on me. I forgot to mention that part. But yeah, I am looking for a seconder to this motion. Thank you, Samir. So with the amendment, is that friendly? Perfect. Okay, cool. So with that amendment friendly, I guess we can begin on discussion. Samir, is there anything you'd like to add as the seconder?
I just think we had a really good discussion in GovCom about this, and glad to see it get approved. Hopefully get approved.
All right, so now is the time for discussion. So any comments? Oh, thank you, Mohammed.
Sorry, I forgot to
I would
mention.
I would just say, if you can use the actual hands up feature when you're online, it will make things easier. Thank you. You're good to go. Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
perfect. I'll do that 100%. It's probably better than me doing this. Just wanted to say, I forgot to mention. So my plan is, from a chair's perspective, is during director reports that we do on a meeting by meeting basis. I plan on updating the board on how we're approaching our successes, if we're on track in terms of on a phase basis. I would encourage you to look at at least on part the table itself, and perhaps the key deliverables and milestones, because those are like key parts of how we're going to approach this generally. And we're already in phase 1, hoping to finish by the end of the month. And it's going to be a very progressive committee this year. And I think that's a focus in the sense where, you need to be attending meetings from day 1 to understand what's going to be happening in meeting 3, 4, 5, etc. So if there are board members here that have an interest in attending committee meetings, I would have urged you to attend from the beginning, but we can work it out. You can discuss it with me. But I think that's it from my end on the motion.
Right.
I yield back.
Yeah. Any comments on this? I do know a lot of the directors were actually at that GovCon committee, so it wouldn't be super surprised if there wasn't, but I'd be interested if there was any comments. Give it a couple seconds. Yes, Rory.
With the problem statement written the way it is now.
So that motion.
Oh, different motion, then never mind. I will hold my time then.
Yeah, we are currently on the work plan motion, so. All right, seeing none, I guess we'll go straight to a vote. All those in favor? All those abstaining? Give it a second for hands to go down. Okay, 2 abstentions, and all those against? Okay.
All right.
They're staring me down.
Get worried not approving a work.
Work plan.
Okay, wait, did I miss that? Did Rory, you have your hand up for, okay, against?
Four.
Okay. I was like,
He didn't put his hand up.
Yeah.
Oh.
Staring at me. He didn't answer any of your questions.
Changed.
Okay, well, that makes things easy. So, with 2 abstentions, the motion is passed. We are now moving on to, 5.1 I guess 0.2, we'll just say, which is the problem statement. So once again, this comes to Mohammed. Actually, you know what? We'll do it. I'm looking for a seconder for this motion. We'll do it that way first. Thank you, Rem. Mohammed, go ahead.
Thank you, David. So essentially, the problem statement accumulates 2, and within phase 1, generating a problem statement. What a problem statement is, generally speaking, is a 2 to 3 sentence statement that sort of encompasses the main objectives or the main problems that we sort of see with the organization, or the gaps perhaps that we want to address. And that's sort of what the problem statement does. It highlights some of the things we've talked about, some of the things students have mentioned. And from that, we hope to use that in terms of evaluating governance models, evaluating options and whatnot. And that's sort of how we're going to approach the next couple of steps. And that is sort of what a problem statement is and what we're hoping to achieve on it.
Right, so I'll go to Rem, and then we did have a hand up from earlier, but Rem, would you like to use your, a second or to go on?
Right now, though.
Okay,
Discuss later.
Rory, would you like to make your comments?
So with the problem statement written as it is now, I know that OCC committee was going to take a look with regards to the whole sort of process. My question is like, given that the problem statement is pretty directly like targeted at advocacy, is there any talks around like the advocacy committee itself having those discussions of like, hey, what might we be doing to sort of improve things? Like, given like it does sort of feel weird when like government's like, oh yeah, the advocacy department, what's the problem? And then the advocacy department hasn't really had the chance to talk about it. I know there's been, discussions across everyone, but I'm just curious if like advocacy in particular is going to be having that discussion as well.
Yeah, we'll go to Samir.
I think the reason we laid it out that way was the AGM motion was clear about this, and we're taking the spirit of the AGM motion of working on advocacy, and that current advocacy is ineffective in the eyes of the student body through their vote. So I think that's why I think it makes sense to do that. And I think it's hard internally to have that view. They can give us feedback and give us suggestions, but I think having external view of their problem statement is good. If we find out those areas of APC that are great, we'll keep them. And then they say, we like this, we keep it. They don't like this. We can take that feedback into consideration when it comes working on that.
Yeah, we'll go to Aria first and we'll come back to you, Rory.
Alrighty, hello. I do apologize. I'm a little sick, so please stay with me as I go through this. So I do also have a couple of concerns. I'll be frank. I mean, not to undermine the awesome work the governance committee did, but I think I'll be dissenting in this particular situation. And I think for folks who've been on board long enough, they know I tend to vote, what I think is best for people and our students, and what is true. Couple of concerns here is, it's very difficult to say the problem with WUSA's advocacy is the fiduciary duty that the board has, because no matter what governance model you use, ONCA will always force you to go through a board. It's just the reality. Doesn't matter if there's a council or nothing, it's a corporation. I also think the idea that there's too much officer workload, excuse me, isn't also necessarily true. And I say this as someone who brought a GM motion forward. The officers have more than adequate amount of support in the system when leveraging things like the co-op mechanisms we developed, like the staffing support we put forward. So I don't think, it's really a good use of student resources to be pushing for another officer or anything like that, as there is no major workload issue of that kind. I can say if I'm doing the job. So for those reasons, I'm a little hesitant to go forward with this vision of how we should move forward to governance reform, and will probably be dissenting on the motion.
Thank you, Aria. We'll go to Mohammed, and I'd like to say something, we'll go to Katie. Sorry, I apologize. Rory did have his up.
You can come back to me later.
Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. I forgot. I just saw I saw some twos up and I forgot. Mohammed.
Thank you, Damien. I mean, I think I'm sort of hearing your points, Arya, and I think what I'd say is perhaps perhaps the reason for maybe your confusion is on my front, because I didn't really go through the problem statement. I've sort of maybe assumed people went into it on their own time, and perhaps that's something I can take note for in the future. I mean, the idea that we're sort of blaming fiduciary oversight for advocacy issues isn't sort of the intention of the problem statement. I mean, I think if we look at it, the way it's phrased, it says, the UNCR's requirement, board prioritizes fiduciary oversight, right? That's a fact. The board does prioritize fiduciary oversight. That is what board is. It's an oversight committee, oversees operations, it oversees governance, oversees, etc. Right? And then we have a comma, and then we say the capacity for impactful and adjust student advocacy and representation from board has been limited. And that's sort of alluding to the fact that, board members tend to be focused on these items, right? Focused on governance, focused on operations, somewhat maybe limited in that sense, but focused on these items, and may not have the capacity or to do advocacy, especially from that perspective. And so, sort of tying that difference. So we're not blaming fiduciary oversight and fiduciary responsibility for the limited advocacy. We're simply drawing the fact that board is supposed to be doing one thing. And that may be limiting the fact that not leading to the fact that they're prioritizing advocacy at all because of board being a focus and a oversight body. Your second point about officers and the fact that adding an officer might not be something that we need based on how much officers work. I mean, I can recognize that. I mean, right now I think none of us have the data. I mean, you've said that you think an officer has the capacity to continue on and use sort of support staff without needing to expand the officer team. We recognize your point. I think I've heard differing points from different officers, and so I think that's what we're doing right now. And I think you're going to see in a later motion, we're going to ask both current officers to start tracking their hours so we can get an idea of how much work they're doing. Right. Upon that, we can look at their portfolios. We can look about how they overlap. We can look at, just generally the quantity of work they're doing, and from that we can make observations. So we're not saying out the gate, let's come out here and increase and add another officer. No, we're saying let's, perform a systematic, data-driven, quantitative approach to look at, what our officers are doing, how much work they're putting in, and from that we can decide, is there a need to add a new officer based on portfolio, or should we look at revising board compensation, or perhaps revising officer roles? There's a multitude of things we can look at, right? So we're not being definitive right now. The point of the problem statement is to be vague, to be open, and that's what the problem statement is, at least to my knowledge. I yield back.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'll be very quick with this because I do think you actually touched on essentially the stuff I want to touch on. I guess I'll just say that this isn't just Mohammed's view. This was from my time in the governance committee at the last meeting. This was the broad understanding of it. Is it that this was not saying that we should try and find a way to remove fiduciary duty? It was a prioritization issue, like Mohammed was saying, and with the extra elaboration that Mohammed gave. But I'll end it there since I just be repeating what Mohammed said. Next is Katie. And then, yeah.
Hello. I'll try to make it brief. The first thing I want to say is I'm not against the motion, and this is mainly a reply to what Arya was talking about, and maybe also my opinion on what was said. But I would say something as a suggestion to governance committee as well is after my position, we also had a co-op student come into let's say the advocacy realm with David and the VP role. And personally, I'd be very interested in seeing how that also affects officer workload, because something that I brought up at the AMM, and ironically arguing against Arya, who got his motion passed, was that I think that a lot of this is about delegation and where we can really see ourselves going in the future. And I can't quite like pinpoint what I was going to say on that, but I have some notes, so give me 1 second to get back to where I was going. But for instance, in 5.2 or 5.3, when we're talking about officer compensation and looking at officer workload, I think reviewing the support structure would be more worth governance time rather than reviewing the officers' roles. And one last point that I think may not be popular is that if we as a board are trying to review our positions, maybe being on board are the wrong, like if we have a problem with fiduciary duty, well, not problem, but let's say like we don't like this aspect of fiduciary duty, maybe being on board is the wrong position for us as students. Like maybe we need to look at other ways to develop a student leadership pipeline to getting involved if we believe that this duty of being a board member might be interfering in our ability as student leaders to do advocacy. So I hope that made sense, and that's all. Thank you.
I do just kind of want to recenter the conversation here a little bit. When we're talking about fiduciary duty, I think it was established that it's less about whether or not it should exist. That's just the rules. That's on our requirements, and less about whether or not the people currently on board are in the right field. It's more about, is there a weakness here, and what is that weakness called, created by? But I think Katie, you made some interesting points. I'll go to Rem because somebody put his. You've got a 1 up. I just want to make sure that you've got the right finger up. That is a 2. Okay, we'll go to Skylar first.
Yeah, I was just gonna respond to that and Mac's comments as well. Firstly, I agree with Arya. I think that some of the wording in this this core problem is very directed on what the outcomes can be, and it kind of leads towards that. I think when we use the phrasing of sustainable officer workloads, it already sets up this condition for it to be solved in a way that manages those things. Whereas I think, like you said, Mac, the idea is to be more vague and open. And I think maybe there's a better way we could do that in order of looking at the staff side of advocacy work as well as the board's composition. That was my main concern with what was said, but.
Thank you. I will add that you did put your hand up after Arya and before Mohammed responded, but Mohammed's response did include the fact that there are several things that would be considered here, not just a new officer, but also redelegation of officer responsibilities, compensation, all of that stuff. So it does not seem like, at least from my understanding, governance committee's only view is that a new officer should be created. And at least, yeah, I'll give my opinion in the regular order, but that was presented by Mohammed. So we'll go to Arya next.
Awesome. I appreciate everyone's, what they said. I think a lot of it makes sense. I just want to clarify as well of why I will be dissenting. I think the fundamental challenge of our structure, my friends, and I've worked in it in 3 years now, is not the structure itself. It's the people around the table oftentimes who create a system where it's not working. We have committees that don't run. We have board members who don't pull their weight. And that really creates this idea that there's a governance problem. Well, in reality, unfortunately, it's oftentimes a people problem. I would also say, our current system hasn't stopped us from advocating for students. We passed a referendum to push the university in certain ways, even though we have legal advice saying, probably don't want to do this, very bluntly. We prioritize students, right? I think a lot of it comes down to the people around that table and how risk averse they want to be. In the end of the day, no matter what is developed, it'll come down to the people at a board choosing how risk averse they want to be, how student centric versus corporate protective they want to stand. So, I think the current writing does not just a little too much to particular direction and perhaps ideology. For those reasons, I think I'm a little bit more hesitant. But I think we do stand up for students. And I think this year we'll do a lot better because we'll have folks who will be much more committed. The system can work if we have good student leaders.
Thank you, Rem.
I honestly feel like people are reading a little too much into the wording. We've said this many times. It is not about fiduciary duty being at odds with advocacy. It is about they're two different jobs. They can not conflict with each other and still be two different jobs. And I actually said in the point from Katie earlier about students, like, maybe they run in the only election that we have wanting to represent students and do advocacy, but then end up on board having to worry about finances and long-term strategy and that kind of stuff. That could be something we look at. Also, the only thing it says about officers in there is sustainable officer workload being a problem. There's nothing about a solution. It's just saying sustainable officer workload is a problem. And I think it is valuable discussion to have right now to inform whoever is working on the solution, what the solution could look like, coming from the people who are experiencing the problems. But I don't think any of the problem statement is contradicting anything that people are saying right now.
Yeah, I'll put myself here because I did put myself in the queue before you, Samir. I will kind of say something very similar to Rem here, and the fact that I'm a little bit disappointed by the discussion here, in the sense that it does seem like we have two separate discussions where we're discussing right now the problem statement as written, which discusses sustainable officer workload which has been cited as an issue that needs to be solved. And the fact that because board prioritizes fiduciary oversight, the capacity for advocacy and representation from the board has been limited. Not so much that fiduciary duty itself gets in the way of advocacy. I think Rem makes a good point that these are two different jobs. I do also just want to add that when we're having a discussion about, it's the people, what if the people were just different? Well, oftentimes the systems are what pushes people to act in certain ways. And if we are consistently having a problem with people, it might be more of a systemic issue that we're facing, right? Where, whether it's your responsibilities or the way the system's built, pushes people to act in one way or another. And part of that discussion when we're talking about governance reform is how do we build systems that incentivize people to act in ways that advocate for student best. This is a problem that we faced that we've had when it comes to directors working long enough hours, is that we can say all we want. It'd be nice if why don't directors work harder? But oftentimes you need to build a system that incentivizes officers to do certain work, right? Or directors to do certain work. I apologize, not officers. I think we're dealing with a separate issue there. But that is the comment I'll make, is that we have to remember that we can't just say, well, why don't people act differently? We need to build systems where they do. Samir, go ahead.
You answered like 80% what I wanted to say. So beautiful. I'll just remind the board in general, like, this is a place for us to start. If there are problems with where board ends up, where this recommendation ends up, we can have those conversations. If GovCon comes back with 72 new officers, we can have that conversation. And we're not attempting to put the solution before the answer, or like
Before the review.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry. But like, this is a starting point for us to go do that journey of, is there an officer issue? What if there isn't? What if it's fine just rejigging some responsibilities? This motion is to allow us to start that journey, and when those problems come up, love to hear the feedback around the table of why certain solutions might not work in a way some would.
So is that a 1 or a 2? Okay, we'll go to Andrew. And then come on.
Yeah, so I actually think I agree with a lot of what Damian and Rem and Samir had to say. I think, oftentimes the president is the one who has, and the officers, the president, the VP, are the ones who have a lot of the advocacy, power and responsibility within WUSA, because they're the ones who relay to external organizations like CASA, like WUSA, like Senate, like board, internal university committees. They're the ones who really has that power. And I've experienced on the Senate, in internal advocacy, working with Damien, working with prior WUSA officers, is that a lot of the times that they have a lot more responsibilities outside of advocacy that they might not have the time to dedicate towards that. And we're facing a lot of issues right now. The university facing a financial crisis. There's talks about cuts. There's talks about post-secondary funding. And I think it's really important that that the structure might need to change so that WUSA can empower the officers and the organization to really advocate on behalf of students on these important issues. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it is a problem statement, and within that statement, we're laying out several problems that we have. I don't think that's necessarily, I reading the statement did not think that, oh, this means that it's going to lead to this solution or lead to that solution. I didn't come into it with those views. So I think it's important that we separate maybe preconceived notions and not try and apply that to what this statement says, and read it for what it is and take it for what it is.
You want Skylar?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Damien, on your point there about the advocacy being limited, did GovCom have any discussions around like any examples of this problem? I know it's a large reference to the AM motion, so it's not necessarily needed, but I was just wondering within the talks and coming up with the Tom statement, was there any like critical moments in advocacy being limited by our fiduciary oversight or any sort of restriction?
I will say I do remember a very specific situation during GovCom where this conversation was brought up around what piece of advocacy were limited. I know some of them were in the EMM. I think I will pass this to Mohammed though, considering he is chair. So maybe it's best if Mohammed, you handle this.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, I mean, so we discussed, I think, 2 key points. One was on the matter of, night bus and the fact that, pointedly so, a lot of students were under the impression that WUSA wasn't on top of its game when it came to sort of advocacy surrounding that point. And then also on the point of the co-op fee increase that happened last year. And so I think those were two discussion points brought up. And I mean, something I generally just wanted to mention was like, from a board perspective, it's quite easy for us to sit here and think that our main obligation is sort of based on, enacting governance policies or overseeing operations in that sense. And in that context, it might, something sometimes I feel is, from that perspective, you want those sort of bodies to be sort of independent of advocacy positions because you don't want them to clash. They're separate in the sense where you want those decisions to be making from a body that people can look up to and understand and sort of align with. But sort of when you bring in that interference and you have people making advocacy policies that perhaps not everyone is fully happy with, right, within our student body, then you can have dispersion and potential issues. And so I think the idea of just sort of trying to consider different ways to sort of separate those two is a conversation worth having in order to just minimize the fact that, it's a fact, right? There's been quite limited on our front board directed advocacy relating to just general topics across campus. And so trying to look at it and just consider, do a root cause analysis is something that we should just be doing generally up front. And I mean, there was a lot of discussion pre-AMM on this front. So we're not just sort of citing the AMM was discussed in spirit, but there was this discussion that happened on the sidelines beforehand and up till now as to sort of what WUSA's positions are just generally on an advocacy standpoint. I mean, 3C was a recent introduction, and I think it was sort of a band-aid trying to piece it together. But I think we can consider it unfinished. There's still stuff that we can do to sort of make it better, perhaps, some more refinement on that front that we could accomplish under sort of a governance reform. I yield back.
Thank you, Mohammed. Samir, I saw your finger up. Is it down or okay?
It's down.
Skylar, go ahead.
Okay. I was just okay. So first, you mentioned the 2 points there: night bus or the night loop, and then co-op fees. I think is the issue that you're saying WUSA wasn't providing enough, or they weren't active enough in leading the initiatives. is that the core issue here, or is it that there's unrecognized advocacy points on campus? Because those 2 points, they were successful. We got the night loop, and then co-op fees, although they still increased, we did have a reduction in that fee due to like FAM and others in their advocacy work there. So I don't see like the issue being that these things existed and they fell through, because we still had some push. And like most campuses, those political organization clubs are the ones that are going to be these key pushers. They're the ones that are going to go to council. They're the ones that are going to be part of the force that's going to make this move. And I think, this is a broader question of where does WUSA stand in that, of course. But I think to your points of, okay, what are some examples of our failing at advocacy is not necessarily a failure of the system or of the WUSA system. It's more so the fact that we weren't the ones responsible. Like, it seems like that's the issue here, is that we weren't the initiators, and I don't really know if that's the spirit of the AAM motion or any of the criticisms of our advocacy work. I think the criticisms is that there's areas within student life, within campus life, within the provincial mandates and federal mandates that we're not advocating for, or on issues of housing, food insecurity. I think these are the advocacy points we're talking about. And so, yeah, those are going to transit. You're right there. But again, we still got these things passed at the end of the day, with or without WUSA. And I think that that's not an issue of WUSA being there.
So I'm going to take this just because there was a reference to something I worked on. I do quickly want to say that from my understanding of the GovCon thing, the two big ones were in fact the night transit and co-op fee. They were not the only ones that were listed. It is possible. I don't know, Samir, you were going to get into those, but there were other things for sure. But I will say, as the person who actually led the night transits drive, just because it happened to work out doesn't mean that it was just going to. I mean, part of the issue that I know I ran into is that we had expected a lot more support from WUSA when we were working on this than we ended up actually getting. And it might feel easy to just be like, well, it didn't work out. Like it was not bound to. When I was in it, there were several situations where I remember thinking if we had WUSA, like institutional involvement in this, things would be different. Things would be way easier. And just because it worked out once doesn't mean it was like that every time something like this happens, it will work out. Sometimes you will need WUSA, right? That's just kind of the nature of activism. If you just have grassroots, oftentimes you might not have that same respect in city council, in regional council, as if you come with kind of an institutional backing as well, with a research team, with all of this stuff. I will pass it to Aria before we go to Samir. I think I did see Aria before Skylar, but I did go to you because it was your question. We'll go to Aria next.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much. So my question was very similar. Like, what are some examples? I can't comment on Nightbus. That was before my term started, but I can comment on co-op fee because I'm not super convinced that the problem statement fixes anything here. Or our team did an effective job doing the advocacy. We reduced it from 10% to 4%, and at the end of the day, it passed because the student leader voted to pass it. So I'm having a hard time recognizing how this problem statement in any way would even resolve or highlight a challenge. Like it's if WUSA is not doing effective advocacy, it's because the folks in those positions who are in charge of the advocacy then are not making the right decisions or allocating enough resources. It's a people thing, not a governance thing necessarily. Nothing is stopping us from giving more resources in certain areas. And I think officers' jobs are advocacy. 90% of it is, in my humble opinion here. They don't do operations, they do governance, which is 10%, come to board, run committees, and then 90% is meet with university admin, with politicians to do advocacy. So if we fail somewhere down that line, that's on us, in my opinion, more than governance.
I apologize. I will interrupt you here just because I don't want to go too long when I believe there was a kind of an
no, that's good.
That's fair.
I do want to
pass it Sandra first, because I think there was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just to reframe a little bit for you and remind you what you're talking about today. It's not the solutions, it's not the report that is going to come from governance. It's the frame that governance is wanting to use to look into, and I'll be very careful with my words, to look into the issues. They may find as they continue on that there's more things there. So the question as a board is, does the question that's been put forward, the problem statement, give governance committee scope it needs to examine the issues, not what issues have come forward, but just does it give them the scope? Mohammed, the question is probably back to you. Does it give unfortunately I wasn't at the governance conversation, but does it give the governance committee the scope it needs to carry out the review that you want to do? That's all the board needs to decide.
Thank you. Yes, I was of similar opinion. I want to recenter. We are discussing the problem statement here, not the solutions. I agree, Arya. This does not like solve the problems of advocacy. It just points out that there are problems with advocacy, and where it kind of seems like that's coming from.
We're getting circular, so I'm gonna drop it.
Okay. I do want to make a comment on the co-op fee because I think that wasn't addressed. I don't see any other hands up. Once again, I think with the co-op fee, just because it did work out and it did not work out the way we wanted it to, does not mean there wasn't a problem where it could have been helpful to have a kind of centralized statement from WUSA. For example, for those who know what happened during the co-op fee increase, it was a student that was a tie-breaking vote that prevented it from going down to 0%. A kind of more cohesive, this is what students believe in, could have swayed that thing. Now, that's not saying that it would have. It's just saying that this kind of plays into a question of, hey, could this have helped, right? And if we believe that there's a chance it could have helped, then it shows that there may be a problem here that we could address, that we could look into addressing. It's a problem statement. Is there a problem that we could look into? Skylar, thank you.
I agree with that, but I don't think, and I think to Sandra's point, the scope of this problem statement does not address that. It limits the issue of which we can investigate. Like I think linking the two between responsible governance and then effective student engagement, it links it so that we have nothing that goes up beyond the responsive governance. It's only looking at the flow structure. Like if we do limit it to this fiduciary oversight or the responsiveness of the board and how that frames our own advocacy, I think like we're limiting ourselves. And I think there's a way broader way of framing this, and I don't know how GovCon could, but I think that there's something that could be investigated on more, like how do we scope it so it can encompass all these issues?
Can I ask just an elaborating point? In what way does it limit it? Apologize. I might have missed that.
No, I just think that the current wording of it, especially in the last sentence here, limits what we're really looking at for the problem.
The last sentence?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna pass it to Samir while I read it and I saw.
I would ask, it seems like this table has a lot of problems, the current one, and not a lot of solutions, frankly. Like, how would you change it? How would you amend it? Is how I would ask, like, what changes can we make to this to improve it so it covers other aspects then?
I should caution that it is also valid to bring up if there are issues.
100%.
Things. I think that's fair. I will pass it to Rory and I'll have my, Rory, is this a 2 or is this a new?
A new point.
Okay, so new point. Then I'll just say.
Mirachi says she has a hand.
Oh. Mirachi, thank you. If you can press the hands up feature, it would pop you up. So I can actually see it. But I see, I'm gonna respond. I'm gonna give it to Mohammed. I'm gonna give it to you, Maricini. But I'll just say on. These seem to be 2 different points with the period. They have also, it feels like there have been challenges balancing responsible governance with effective student engagement and sustainable officer workloads. That kind of feels slightly, but not completely separate from the advocacy point. Like it could be linked, but these are 2 different sentences. It feels like for a reason, at least is my interpretation. So I don't know if it's saying that to deal with the advocacy, you have to deal with the officer's sustainable workload. It's just, these are 2 problems. They may or may not be linked, but these are problems for the problem statement. I'll give it to Mohammed. and then Maricini.
Thank you. For reference, I don't know if Maricini's like screen is showing up because I've seen her hand up for quite a while. I think she has a 1. She can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if it's showing up on the screen, but I do have a point. So I just wanted to point that out. So I mean, I'm sort of trying to understand the perspective to which you're coming from, Skylar. So I mean, if we sort of break it down, right? So we're talking about the one current board, you know, is an oversight board, right? Per ONCA, and it's prioritizing the fiduciary oversight. That is point 1, right? Point 2 is that, you know, right now the capacity for impactful and agile student advocacy is sort of, you know, is in question. So that's a separate point. And so I think that sort of encompasses anything related to advocacy. And I think the key word here is even agile advocacy, right? A lot of concerns have been like, how fast have we been in terms of responsiveness to address ongoing advocacy concerns, perhaps ones that are, you know, not tolerable to a 3 to 4 week meeting, you know, gap. So that's sort of the second. Third, you know, representation. That's a general point. You know, we can argue. You know, we have 13 elected people across WUSA. You know, how can we sort of look at representation a little bit better and see if there's anything we can do? Again, vague. I know I'm probably going to hear a point later, but this is vague. This doesn't suggest a solution. This doesn't say let's stack the board. This doesn't say let's do this, let's do that. Vague. Just talking about a blanket thing that we should try and approach to fix, right? And then full stop, new point. There have been challenges balancing responsible governance with effective student engagement, right? How are we sort of constructed, you know, when we moved into a unicameral system, right? A system that has worked, you know, from a perspective of governance quite well. And so how is that balanced in terms of student engagement and sustainable officer workloads? You know, we changed from 4 to 2 officers. What's the impact? Have we done an impact study to see how the sort of portfolios of our officers have changed, right? So it's about sort of these small nitty-gritty items, and we're sort of separating them into small points. This is just an enlarged discussion point about several different issues, and it's just giving governance committee the mandate to just begin looking into them. No solution, just a mandate to begin looking into a variety of problems across different spectrums of WUSA.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Once again, we're discussing the problem statement specifically, the text on the screen. So that's what we'll continue to work with. I see Skylar with you too.
Yeah, okay, so I understand your points a little bit better. But so in the current statement, it is impactful and agile student advocacy. Is that the actual issue? Is that what GovCon decided, those 2 adjectives, impactful and agile? Because I've heard different things about our advocacy. Maybe impactful is a really good one, but it also could be the capacity of our advocacy. I think there's maybe others people have identified. Is it really those 2 that are the most, I guess, meaningful for our scope? And does it limit us if we don't include something broader?
I just want to say I am working under the assumption here that Maricini, your hand is a 1, which I was told it was. I just want to make sure. So if it's not, please let me know. But I'll give that back to Mohammed because it was a direct question.
No, it was a 2, but I just put it down because it's okay. It's
Okay,
fine.
I
It's okay,
apologize.
yeah.
I was working under the assumption it was a 2. I mean
No,
a 1.
you're okay.
Yeah, we'll go to Mohammed.
Yeah, I'll give a quick response, I'd say. So, you know, so part of the consultation when we created this was we looked at AMM, and then we, you know, right now we have sort of, you know, our VP in committee, Rem, who's in charge of external advocacy. So that individual is present. We also had Samir, you know, who has done advocacy. We had Damien as well. So we had a variety of people involved in this discussion on a governance level, providing input. And I think from the scope of whatever we've discussed in terms of gaps in advocacy, this problem statement has encompassed that all, right? At least from the way we constructed it. And so from there, I don't think any of us who have sort of, you know, looking at addressing this future on and the way we phrased this early on have seen any gaps. So I don't think there's more to discuss on that front. I think on the front of this discussion on the problem statement, I think it's been a bit circular. I mean, at the end of the day, everything is going to come back to board. Everything's going to come back here. And so it's a very low risk item when it comes to sort of going over this nitty gritty, because anything we want to do is essentially a subset of board, right? That's what committee is. I yield back.
Yeah, I'll give it to Samir. I just want to know, you still want that new point, right? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
But I think, Skylar, just to let you know, my thought process on that is advocacy to me should actually make change so impactful and needs to be quick and able to change under the evolving university landscape. Those are the two big things for me. And that's why impactful and agile, I think, are appropriate ones.
Do we have any new arguments on this one that's lasted a little while? No? Okay, we'll go to the new one. Thank you, Rory.
Okay, sounds good. So I was at the governance committee when this was sort of discussed, and I brought up, my various thoughts there, and so I didn't want to, really try and talk as much and sort of hear what other people were thinking. And I've heard quite a bit, and my still general concern with this problem statement is around that first portion. I've heard many different arguments for it throughout the period. Muhammad saying, this is a fact, this is specific. I've also heard the fact around, there's sort of the three different problems, it's this first part and then the capacity and then the third part around that third sentence, or sorry, the second sentence. But my question to board is, what is the purpose? And if you think about it, like for Barar, sorry, what is the purpose of that first half of the sentence? If you just remove it, if you just said the capacity for impactful and agile student advocacy and representation from board has been limited, you still have the same problem statement. So it's so weird for me to there's an insistence to include this. And the only reason I can see for its inclusion is you're tying those two pieces together. That's in my mind what's happening. It's you're tying to the fact that there's this on-campus requirements and you're tying together the capacity, because the capacity might be unrelated to board. Maybe our advocacy is just we don't have enough support in there, and that might be unrelated to on-campus requirements, and making it more broad by again removing that first part, I think is what should be done. And so I'm not going to motion it right now because I think it's against the rules to motion after speaking, but I will be coming back to motion to remove that first half of the first sentence.
Disagree. Board's job is fiduciary duty, and board should be allowed to focus on fiduciary duty. And if that gets in the way of advocacy, someone else should focus on advocacy, maybe.
I do have a response to that. And it is something that I knew was going to be brought up. But my question to you is regardless, under any system, whatever system or solution we come up with, board at the end of the day is going to be responsible for what happens with WUSA's advocacy, right? Mm-hmm. So no matter what, it's going to have to come back to board. So that doesn't really matter when it comes to this part around the first half of the sentence.
I'm going to give it to Melissa.
Thanks, folks. I think you've all brought good points, and I'm going back and forth about say a thing, don't say a thing, but just if it's helpful, and I guess for me from that, trying to look at what's changed, how are we doing things, what is it that we're hoping to get to in terms of that outcome. I think the other piece that sort of is maybe interesting to discuss and maybe feels like it isn't necessarily captured broadly in this problem statement is the who, and is that this feels like, to me, with the commentary around board prioritizing fiduciary duty and officer workload, that there's sort of a general assumption that maybe that advocacy work all needs to be done by board. And I guess for me, what would be interesting is just that broad question of how we're currently undertaking the work, and then also where students fit in that work. And is having students being a part of this advocacy work in different areas always going to be board, or can there be other ways that students engage in that work? I know we've, shared some of the different places that happens now, but just as a part of this process, kind of considering what that looks like. And then again, ultimately, depending on what comes back, what roles would board play in different areas of advocacy, and what areas might other students have that opportunity. So I think that, again, kind of goes back to Katie and Rem's commentary around, officers are doing a large chunk of that right now. If other board members are doing other pieces that are more on that fiduciary area, are there specific roles for students to have within advocacy that might not be on the board? Again, I don't know the answer to that, but in terms of being more broad, to me, the sort of the how, the process, and looking into that, what are the results that we're sort of looking for? And again, have we been able to reach those or not? And then what is the role of students in that advocacy work? So those are sort of, as I try and break down the areas that I think we want to dive into, what kind of comes to my mind, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I do just want to say, first of all, thank you. And I think that's worth something for GovCom to consider. I do want to point out that I do want to be careful about when we're discussing how to kind of solve this problem, when we're kind of focusing on the problem statement here, but I do think those are worthwhile discussions for GovCom, or of course, board as a whole to kind of figure out throughout this period. I have comments, but I apologize, I've lost track of who was first. I'm going to pass to Mohammed as chair and then reorient.
Thank you, Damien. And first, thank you, Melissa. I'm going to keep those points down and we'll bring them up in governance. So, I mean, to your point, I'm sort of directly talking about what you were saying, Rory. You mentioned how, at the end of the day, board is still there, in terms of overseeing, passing, and sort of like an ultimate authority. And yeah, sure. But, based on fiduciary oversight and the fact that board is of consequence of the actions of any, subcommittee or whatnot. Yes. But it's a question of who's the initiator, who's sort of who's moving these sort of items, right? And right now it tends to be, officers or board members. And, that's sort of the question we're trying to look at right now, right? How limited has that been? Because, if you think, generally chairs are the ones moving motions in committees, and perhaps that's something we can look at in governance to see how can we make, at-large members perhaps move more motions. There's so much to it, right? We're trying to be general here. And so that's I think a key point that we're trying to say right now. We're not coming out here and saying, oh, we're trying to shift the way advocacy is done in the organization. We still recognize that stuff has to pass through board, but it's about the manner in which it does that and sort of how we can ensure that a lot is coming through and it's not necessarily have to be directed by board members themselves, right? Which is a key point here.
I'm going to pass it to Rem, and then I'm going to respond, and I do want to pass it because it kind of feels like we're essentially in a kind of a way discussing an amendment that Rory is about to bring. Yeah. So I'm going to close it after that and then pass it to Rory and then just kind of move forward with it. But go ahead.
Yeah, board is responsible for everything at the end of the day. Board does not do everything. We're responsible for overseeing operations at the end of the day. We're not out there running the bomber. And I do think there is a problem with we need more student representation in advocacy. And the fact that board is supposed to be, there's no other students that are hand-on for advocacy. And so board is expected to be hand-on for advocacy rather than overseeing advocacy at the end of the day. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, I just want to give kind of a direct reply because your question was like, why include that, right? Why include that first section, right? And I think because it speaks to a problem that we're seeing. Arya brought this up earlier about it's a people problem. Why don't we just kind of work in a different direction to kind of deal with this advocacy, right? And I think this is the problem. The problem here is that because of the fact that there's a fiduciary oversight, and that's the priority. There's the capacity for impactful and adult student advocacy and representation from board has been limited, right? So this is the problem. The problem is because of ANCA, board can't do stuff like that, right? So
you've always had as a not-for-profit organization, you have always had the fiduciary responsibility. Just let me finish. What's heightened it is when not-for-profits came out of the Corporations Act. So it truly is irrelevant. The fact is more heightened has been made of it because you're aware of ANCA, but that responsibility has been there since this organization was incorporated.
So I do want to clarify that whether or not it's from ANCA directly, I believe the original draft was missing specifically due to ANCA requirement, but either way, because of a legal duty to board, a fiduciary duty. Yeah, that's fine. But the point is the main crux of what I'm arguing here is because of a legal responsibility for board to kind of prioritize that fiduciary responsibility, that it limits the actual time that can be spent on advocacy and stuff like that. It just, that system there's a problem there. And I think that's what it's pointing out. That seems to be why it was presented at the start. So that's that direct answer. I did say cut it off there and then pass it back to Rory if you want to still utilize your one.
Yes, I'd like to make the motion or amend motion to remove that first part and just cut it off into started at the capacity for impactful and agile student advocacy and representation from the board has been limited.
Is that like noted somewhere? I don't know if someone wrote that down, but can we put that in the chat in some way, just so people can look at it? I'll even give Rory a second to write it down since it is his.
All it is doing is removing everything up into the first comma.
Yeah. Okay, then I will open it up to discussion.
There we go. I put it in.
Is that what I put in chat correct, Rory?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so did your two kind of turn into a one in this situation, or?
Well, Mike, first of all,
Oh, yes, you're right. You do get a chance to.
a second or first, and then I get a chance to speak.
Thank you. I apologize. First Amendment. Do we have a second for the motion? I saw Skylar. So that's Skylar seconds.
So very quickly, not to very quickly, in my thoughts, given that this is a problem statement and Mohammed and the rest of the board has repeatedly identified, like, generally speaking, we want the statement or the problem to be broad enough, that they're able to undergo their work. My question is to the board, what specifically here is the addition of this line adding and what it's taking away, right? I feel like the addition of this sentence, though we might treat it as like, oh, it's just a fact, or it should just be in there, it sort of does restrict our potential possibilities looking forward. And I worry about those correlations as I talked about earlier.
Skylar, as a seconder, okay, you're good. I do want to say before we go that I do agree with Rory, apologies, I just saw Arya text. Rory on one specific point that it does add a further restriction in some sense. I think the problem statement does restrict in some senses, that even the second part of it focuses on advocacy and tackling that. So any sentence will in some sense restrict. I guess the question here is it a worthwhile addition to kind of further focus? Is it restricting or is it focusing? I think that's the real discussion here, because I do agree that in some sense it does restrict it. I guess I'll just say that I do think it's a worthwhile thing to add in the sense that it does it does bring up an important point that I think it would be helpful to GovCom to take into consideration as they move forward. It's that you can't just tell board to work work harder. You know what I mean? Because there is a problem that gets in the way of them just tackling this as themselves, and that is that they have legislative requirements to focus on that fiduciary responsibility before they get into stuff like advocacy. So I just want to say that, and then we can move to responses to that, like Rory.
Can I just throw a point of privilege real quick?
Yes, go ahead, Mom.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this comes in our procedure for Robert's rules, but I think I have a chance to say whether the amendment's friendly or not.
Yeah, doesn't that?
Yes, it
would have to be. There's a chance for objection there, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I recognize the amendment. I didn't see making a substantial change on a governance perspective, on a reform perspective from governance committee, and so I would say the amendment is friendly.
Are there any objections to that?
I missed half of that. Can you?
He's saying it's a friendly amendment.
Oh, okay.
Are there any objections to that? Okay. Seeing none, it is passed on friendly. And we come back to the motion at hand as amended, which is the capacity for impactful and agile student advocacy and representation for board has been limited. There have been challenges balancing responsible governance with effective student engagement and sustainable officer workloads. I see Mohammed with a 1.
Yes, I'd like for us to move to a vote. If anyone wishes to speak, then I'll raise a call to question.
Okay. Are there any objections to just going to a vote? Like, Otherwise, we'll have to do a 2/3 majority thing.
So we're voting on the motion or the amendment?
My question, he's calling the question. Can we just go to the vote, or does someone want to actually call the question vote, which is a 2/3 majority? Okay, let's go. Okay, with that being said, we'll move to the vote. So all those in favor of the motion as amended? Perfect. All those abstaining? All those, oh wait, sorry, I just want to make sure. We get a second. Yeah, there's one from the start. Okay. All those abstaining, all those against? Perfect. So the motion passes with 2 against.
Puts 2 or vote in favor.
Oh, yeah, Arya voted in favor.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I voted in favor of the amendment. Sorry, folks. I thought it's a better amendment.
Oh, I apologize.
I think it's been unclear. Yeah.
No,
Passed.
no, it isn't. Yeah, we were back onto the regular motion because it was amended as friendly. Arya, we can just.
Oh,
readjust
yes,
your
then
vote. We are voting on the motion as amended.
Yes, it was friendly. Sorry. I think it's not problems, but I think it's way better. And I think it's a reasonable compromise. So yes, I'm voting in favor.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the motion passes with 2 against. Okay, perfect. So with good news, we can move on to the next one. So that is 5.1.4, which is streamlining board committee submission timeframes for.
Point three.
3.3.
Oh my God, I apologize. I'm getting old. It is 5.1.3. Officer compensation review per 2025 annual members meeting. We'll go to Mohammed to, no, actually, we're looking for a second on this one. Thank you, Samir. Seconded by Samir. Now, Mohammed, you get first speaking order.
Wonderful. Thank you, Damien. Yeah, so essentially, this motion builds off, what was brought forth in AMM by our very own Arya. And in that context, the concern was, officer compensation hasn't been appropriate throughout the years, or at least, in certain occasions where officers have felt that they've been overworked, they've done more work than was required to them per compensation, per the requirements set out during their election. And so we're essentially trying to just initiate a review. This is generally a very uncontroversial motion. We're looking at a fact-finding mission, gathering data first and foremost. So taking, whatever Damien and Rem do for the next 3 months, looking at it and just sort of performing an evaluation. Obviously, most of what this is might be controversial, and so we'll look at it within the confidential session of board. And so if a version is going to come down on a committee level, we're going to either redact it or we're going to first discuss this. And so I think it's generally a pretty straightforward motion. We're talking about just getting more information in terms of the decision-making process, and that's just going to help on all fronts. And so I think this is a very simple motion and wouldn't require much conversation.
Well, conversation can happen if it needs to, but we'll go to Samir for a second speaking order. Okay, cool. Rory.
I just want to say that I think this is a good idea. I don't envy the poor officers who are going to be tracking their hours for the next couple of months. But I do think getting this kind of data is going to be important when we have those further conversations.
Thank you. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll speak. Yeah, correct. I will just add, though I'm happy with the motion, I will just let you guys know that I will be tracking the hours to the best of my ability. It is a little bit difficult with full-time work to track specific categories, but I will do my best effort to do so. Though the specific numbers may not match up because there's time moving between meetings, there's time to actually random conversations often pop up at the office to do with WUSA, and tracking the specific 0.3 and 0.4 hours will be a little bit difficult. I don't think you need to amend the motion. I think it's good as it is. I just wanted to caution board that there might be some caveats with how me and Rem do it, but we will do it to the best of our abilities. Mohammed?
Thanks, Damien. And yes, just for board's information, I'll be talking to both Damien and Rem throughout the process, just giving them an understanding of sort of at bare minimum what governance is looking for, trying to make sure that we don't go too specific, because again, we want to be understanding of the fact that both our officers have a lot of work on their plate, so that's one definite point. I would just like to quickly move one quick friendly amendment, and that is, so be it further resolved that this presentation will be at the confidential session of the October board meeting. So that's just one quick small procedural change, just making it clear that this presentation is going to be confidential.
I'm not quite sure if I need to object, or if I could just ask.
Anyone can object.
Mohammed, just leave it at the October board meeting and then there and use Damien's discretion.
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah, so essentially, it was gonna be my comment, but it's also Sandra made it very well, is that it can just be left up to discretion about what the content of that looks like, and a conversation can come between like the government staff and me on figuring out if it deserves to be confidential. Is that fair?
Or as long as we've discussed it right now and we sort of set out how it's going to be, that I'm fine with it. So as long as it's on the minutes.
I just want to set out how it's going to be, or is it okay if we just acknowledge that it can go through regular agenda setting, which would take into account whether or not it needs to be in confidentiality? I just want to get.
Yes, no, I'm fine with us doing that beforehand once the presentation is completed, just as long as it's done.
Okay. Is that would you still like the user two there?
Yeah.
Yeah, go
I'd
ahead.
just like to respond and say that, thank you very much. I would hope that we do keep it in the public session. I think there's also a way for government maybe to include a confidential version as well as a public version that we can share as well. So maybe just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can keep in mind. We will also keep in mind ways to try and keep it without getting the agenda too long by doing the same report twice, once with confidential stuff. But we can probably figure that out. We'll try our best to do so, but I don't think we need to amend that. We can take that into consideration. Anything else, or can we go to a vote? Perfect. All those in favor? Okay, there we go. I believe, was that?
Oh, yeah, okay, oh, sorry.
Not really. Do I? I don't think
You're
so.
tracking your time.
Yeah, it's not really, yeah. All of those, I think that's everyone, but all those abstaining. I'm gonna put your hand down. All those against? Okay, it is passed unanimously. Which means now, for real, we can go on to, and yell at me if I get it wrong, 5.1.4 this time. Streamlining board committee submission timeframes to improve collaboration. Mohammed, you are doing a lot of speaking today. Can we have a seconder for this as well? All right. Mohammed, would you like to use your first speaking order?
I would. Thank you, Damien.
Welcome.
Well, maybe for the last time, on our 4-motion streak. Yeah. This motion I think is perhaps one of my favorite coming today, and that's essentially under the guise of streamlining board committee submission timeframes. And sort of what I looked at and sort of understood as a chair is that to some extent it's actually harder to bring items through committee, to board because of the way we set up our system, where we have 14-day notice for both board and committee, right? And so you end up having notice go out to submit agenda items 14 days before a committee meeting. They get sent out. Come the committee day, great, passes committee. Now they have to be sent within 14 days of the board meeting. So we end up just looking at a very elaborate, very long process in terms of getting an item from committee to board. And I think that's not the way we want it to be. We want items to go through committee based on the fact that now we get at-large approval, at-large consultation. And I think that's generally something we should always aim to do regardless. And so what this motion does, it sort of makes that process easier. We're now looking at, a collective 20 days between, committee to board as opposed to the previous 28 days. I did consult our governance team, specifically Esther, when creating this motion to make sure it wasn't putting overt stress on their department when it came to collating the agenda beforehand. And I think at least from a committee perspective, generally, most of the items come in or are generated beforehand, and we put them in on the agenda as they come in. Right. And so that sort of helps the process and makes it easier to release the agenda when the deadline stays out. And so for clarification, the agenda, release date is the same. It's still going to be 7 days before the meeting itself, but now the the deadline to submit a motion, right? The notice is going to be 10 days. And so that shortening period by 4 days to be exact. And so, yeah, I'm hoping this motion just helps collaboration between board and committees and encourages directors to bring in items on a committee level, which is sort of how we should be doing things generally. I yield back.
Thank you, Mohammed. Rory, as a second, you have second speaking order. Would you like to use that? Okay. Thank you. We will begin discussion on the item. Does anyone have a first? Give it a second to cool down, actually, before I ask this question, because we're all moving into the room. Okay.
Where did you come from? On the ground, you disappear.
Okay. With things having calmed down a little bit with the food coming in, I'm looking, would anybody like to comment on or speak on this motion? Not even anyone saying that they like it or hate it. Okay, we got some hands up. I'll go with Skylar.
I think this is a good motion. I think it sets out the proper deadlines. And I think this might have been an issue. I don't know, but I think it's been an issue for previous committees or previous board as well. So I just wanted to say that this seems like a great solution and we come up with some motion.
Thank you, Ren.
Very cool, very helpful. Last APC meeting, I had to schedule it for like a couple of hours before the motion deadline. And Marianne actually just gave me the dates for the next APC meeting, and they straddle the deadline if we don't make this change and would be well before the deadline if we make the change. So very cool, very nice.
All right, anything else? Okay, well, that makes things easy. I believe this is, in fact, last motion tonight.
Oh,
Mine.
honorarium.
Oh, well, this, no, this,
It's not a motion.
yeah, last motion. But if with that being done, we'll go to a vote. All of those in favor of the motion? Hands, I'm seeing hands. Okay, that is unanimous. So we won't deal with the rest of it. Perfect. So with that done, we are now finally done with 5.1, which is the biggest item of the day. 5.2 has been moved to consent, so we don't have to worry about that. We are now left with 5.3, discussion on National Indigenous Advocacy Committee honorariums. We do not need a seconder for this, because it's just a discussion item. Rem, are you ready to speak on this? Okay, was your
As you may know, WUSA recently joined the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, which has a sub-body called the National Indigenous Advocacy Committee, where they have one seat for an Indigenous student from each member school. Also, WUSA just passed and published our Indigenization Action Plan, so this is kind of a priority for us right now. And I would really like to hopefully get us a NIAC delegate. If not for this year, at least start building the momentum and interest this year so we can get one for next year. If you read the doc, there's a lot of like various advice, things to consider for recruiting the student. WUSA already covers travel for me to go to CASA and WUSA conferences. I think it's doable to budget for that if we get an IAC candidate. The other thing is they do recommend giving an honorarium. In fact, in the template job description that NIAC has prepared, it just straight up says there's an honorarium, but they leave it up to the school to determine how much it is. The reason it's a discussion at this point is I have no idea if I'm going to be able to find anyone this year. But in order to start recruiting, I would like to be able to say how much of an honorarium we would be offering them. So I guess just discuss how much we could offer, I guess.
I guess I have a question here then, because this is a motion, we're not necessarily setting a number, like formally, is this something like you kind of want to know what we're thinking, so you can have a discussion? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go to, I think I saw Aria first, but we're going to Aria and Katie.
No, thank you. I think NIAC is great, and I think it's one of the advantages that CASA really brings forward. I would just say I think it makes complete sense to give an honorarium, but the workload that person does is very dependent on what position within NIAC they get. So if I can explain this quickly, NIAC, pretty much what it is in practice is a committee of the board of CASA, and in practice it operates like the other committees. If our representative ever becomes the chair, that's a lot of work. They will need to do traveling with the board of CASA, and that could be up to $15,000 to $20,000 from my last year's calculations worth of cost. Now, that's just travel costs, right? But the reality is, if they're just a normal committee member and they don't run for the chairship of NIAC, it doesn't even really require travel because the committee meets online for everything. So they could be in Waterloo and just open their laptop, and then we could just come pay them for their time. We could also contact the folks at CASA to get an estimate of how many times that committee meets and for how long they meet, so we can do an hourly rate based on what board puts in. Let's say the same hour per 1 hour worked at board. But yeah.
Thank you, Arya. Ram?
Yeah. 2 points. One, on the travel, NIAC delegates are also invited to the what's it called? The regular CASA conferences that I go to. In fact, most other schools send their pres and VP external. Damien does not have the time for it. We've talked about it. Future presidents likely won't either. Would kind of be nice to have someone else, actually. And also, I believe it's a really important opportunity for the NIAC delegate. So there's a little more travel than just the NIAC meetings, which are online. And the honorarium thing, yeah, I think work hours is a good thing to go off of, but it doesn't really have to be completely determined by that. I do believe there's a link in the doc that I linked that lists like how often they meet and how long they meet. I think it is 2 hours monthly.
I see Samir.
We know how much other schools pay their NIAC delegate.
No, I have emailed them. I haven't heard back. I emailed them very recently.
I see Skylar and then Andrew.
I was just wondering, if you've talked to anyone here in the Indigenous community about like what the reception's been and anything, it's.
Yeah, so I've met with the Office of Indigenous Relations, which the Indigenous Student Center was merged under recently. They are big fans of CASA. They like CASA's structure, and they think it would be really nice for Waterloo to have a seat on it. They also generally said, like, yeah, if you want an Indigenous student to do this, it's really important that they don't incur any additional costs and you give them a moderate honorarium. They didn't say anything about the specific number.
Can I follow up? Is that good?
Yeah, that's a 1.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and like, what if you can, in your own words, like, what are the main roles of this delegate? I mean, obviously, an honorarium that's 15 or more would be very large. So, what would be their main role for Waterloo?
Essentially represent Indigenous students on NIAC from both just they're an Indigenous student perspective, but also they're an Indigenous student at Waterloo. What are their experiences at Waterloo that are affected by like federal policy around Indigenous students and Indigenous people in general? So they won't. Towards the end of this governing year, I want to have a conversation about who the secondary delegate seat that WUSA sends to CASA should go to. If president can never go to any of the meetings. But in general, if the NIAC delegate is only the NIAC delegate, they're just representing their perspective as an Indigenous student. They're going to all of the other conferences as a learning opportunity, but not necessarily to represent WUSA at those places. And they'll show up to Advocacy Week in November to represent Indigenous voices alongside the other advocacy that does.
I just want to ask, Aria, is that a 1 or a 2 that you've got raised?
Is someone ahead of me? It's a 1 then.
Yeah.
I'll just go 1.
Was Andrew, it didn't.
So I'm like looking at the document, it says that like the NIAC delegate should like is strongly encouraged to attend like 4 conferences.
Yes.
And then it says that they should like attend at least 1. Do we have a plan on like if the NIAC delegate's gonna attend all 4, 1, and then the advocacy week, like, do we have a plan for that or?
So these 4 conferences are the ones that I would attend. If we do recruit one, in the future, when we have people consistently filling that role, my hope is they would attend all of them. So that would be wouldn't it be fun? Because I attend 4 plus the Indigenous one.
It says foundations, policy,
Polystrat,
NIAC retreat, and the advocacy.
NIAC retreat, Avo Week, and General Assembly at the end of the year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the hope is they would attend all of those. The other thing is recommended to attend at least 1. The problem with recruiting this year is that Polystrat is a couple of weeks away. Ain't no way we're getting someone before that. If we don't get someone before that and they don't attend Polystrat, the last conference they could attend before Advo Week is NIAC, the NIAC retreat, which I honestly don't think prepares them enough to go to Advo Week this year. So again, honestly, for this year, this is more of a momentum building type of discussion. We're hoping to get someone for next year.
I had Rory first.
Okay. General thoughts. Okay. I guess I'll start throwing some things out here and see what people are feeling. Generally, I say like travel costs should be covered if they're going to these events. I think most people can recognize that we're not going to have the student, pay anything with regard to that. And obviously the opportunity to go to these events is going to be offered to them if they can make it. My general, I'd be interested to hear from Melissa when we're going to be like selecting someone to be this NIAC delegate. I know in our indigenization plan, like we hope to build better connections. And so like my question is like maybe thinking a bit broader, is like there a way that this student can be not just a NIAC delegate, but be something, broader and in connection with WUSA in any way?
Yeah, I'm gonna give that to Melissa.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Rory. And I think there's probably an opportunity for us to think about what that could look like. I haven't thought about it specifically until now. And I know Rem and I haven't formally talked about it. Looks like Rem, if you've got some feedback, by all means. But I think there's definitely more ways that we want to get those connections strengthened and get those students involved and have, sort of those advocates to continue to connect us to those students and those communities. So if we can find a way to broaden it, if that makes sense, then, I think we're open to it.
Yeah, so this is something I've been thinking about, but haven't talked about yet, because it kind of depends on any gov changes, maybe. But I was thinking, sorry, I don't know if it really depends on gov changes, actually. But I was thinking to guarantee them a seat on one of the advocacy related committees or whatever. And the other thing is, as a part of the, this is also in my report later, as a part of the recruiting drive for this position, we are also recruiting for OUSA GA delegates this year because they're working on an Indigenous students paper, as well as getting things prepared. Is pretty far out, but also not really, because nothing is ever really far out. Recruiting Indigenous students for our board elections next year.
I just do want to maybe set a practice here. This is up to me. Aria, because I do see your one. Can you put your hand down when I see you, just so that you can put it back up to, as a 2 for the current discussion? So that, in a way, you kind of blocked from the discussion because I permanently think you've got a 1 up. But I do see you. Any responses to Rem? To the current point? Okay. Seeing none, it is actually Aria next.
All right, awesome. I'm just gonna, I forgot, but I'm gonna try to come back to it quickly. I think the situation here is, we want to empower Indigenous students to get active. I'm just gonna say, I personally, I think the travel component, CASA conferences are a week long. You have to go for like almost 5 to 7 days sometimes. A full-time student, which is what this role will be going for, will have a struggle meeting that and their course load. So I think we should definitely recruit for next year. I think it should be an option. I think, we should start by saying, just join the committee, do the onlines if you are available to a conference, which is very rare. If they're a full-time student, we can fund, we could fund it, but shouldn't be a requirement to have to travel. That will be a restriction for them to join. I personally, it's hard for us to recruit as well, and that's something we need to really work on. I think there needs to be a strategy for recruitment. It's important to recognize most schools that part of CASA also don't bring a NIAC delegate because it's a systemic issue we have. A lot of folks have challenges getting Indigenous students involved. So it's important to recognize that factor as well. So if, I would say be cautious of developing a position for it if we can't even have basic recruitment targets. So, things like that to keep in mind of, but I think we should open it up for at least next year applications. So maybe we'll get some people who are interested.
I will say, I do think the framework is helpful for when we're coming together with it. I mean, if I'm wrong, for coming together with a strategy for recruitment, if we know what it looks like, it will help. From my understanding, so I do think it's probably still a worthwhile conversation, even if I probably do agree with you, Aria, that we might still have problems recruiting even with an honorarium. But yes, okay. I see Andrew with a 2.
I just want to say that, like, Aria, I actually completely agree with you. I think that we shouldn't restrict people if they're not able to attend these conferences, because I noticed that like 3 of the 4 conferences are in the summertime, and most other schools, students would have summers off, so they'd be able to travel. But for us, if you're in a co-op program, for example, you would either be on a work term or study term, while, and you might not be able to travel to the conference. So I think attendance to the conferences shouldn't restrict someone for being a NIAC delegate. If we obviously don't have anyone else, like, priority should be that a delegate should be able to attend conferences.
Yeah, the idea is that those would be optional, which now that I think about it, I think I need to make more clear in the recruitment material that we're preparing.
I guess my question then would be, you're next. What if the conferences themselves aren't required, right? What then is required of an IAM delegate? Because I assume there must be, within the conversation, maybe I missed it, other stuff that a NIAC delegate can do?
The NIAC retreat would be required for the NIAC delegate. Advo week, I would say probably required too.
Mhm.
I don't think it is like, I don't think CASA requires it for the NIAC delegates. But I think if we want them to do advocacy, they should be at the advocacy event. As well as the regular NIAC meetings,
Okay.
which are online.
Seeing no other choose, I think I'll ask another question. Then is that, are there any hybrid options for any of those things, or is it they must be in person?
Or in person.
Okay, thank you. Next, seeing no other 2s.
This was kind of just a small point about also both recruitment and sort of engaging with other groups, other than, I guess, just the Office of Indigenous Relations, because sometimes I can be a bit distrustful of university offices. Like the other groups, like maybe the GSA, if they have input, is always helpful, but also RAISE and community groups like the Willow River Center, Landback KW, so on. The other small observation I had is a NIAC retreat says sometime in August, and if that's late August, that would work with most UW students.
No other comments?
Oh yeah. I'll respond to that. Yeah, that's in the plans, yeah.
All right, now it goes to Scott.
Well, I have a few concerns, but first, I just want to say, like, obviously, this is very important to our initiative. This is something we should be doing, you know. And I think we're going to get caught up in maybe the numbers a little bit, but that shouldn't be what we're discussing, whether or not, you know, spending a certain amount of money and the impact of having a delegate like this. I did want to go back, and I think Rory mentioned it with the indigenization action plan. I think we had in this board meeting, we talked about the amount of students consulted to during that plan, and it was very low. I don't remember the numbers. Yeah, I don't, Melissa, if you remember, but it was very, very low. It was less than 10 students, I believe. So this is a concern that I think will carry on for anything we do. I agree with Rita's points. I think maybe reaching out to the Indigenous Students Association would be an avenue. Maybe you've already done that. I don't know. And then, you know, another question I had is this honorarium that we would be giving, and I don't know if we're going too deep in the numbers. I just know that was your motion, but if the travel alone is $15,000 to whatever, really don't know, but let's say it's $15,000 to $20,000. What are we going to be paying the honorarium on top of that for all this travel and extra responsibilities? I think that's something we should really consider because it should be equitable, whatever the pay is. And then, then I guess that was really all I had to say. I yield to whoever.
Oh, I did see Rem before. Do you yield? Yeah, okay. So Rory. Sure thing. First off, when it comes to the $15,000, I'm not sure exactly. I think Aria probably like did that for all of the conferences for an entire year, and we're sort of only looking like at a half year at this point, given that there's only going to be the two that they can likely go to. And I'd also probably point out the fact that a lot of these, like our BP is already going to most of them. So there might be a possibility of saving a little bit of cost there. Yeah, number? Do I have a number? I can think of a number if you want me to, but I don't think it'd help us in this conversation. But in general, I don't think this particular, I don't think we should be saying because the travel cost is so high, therefore they get no honorary or something along those lines. I think the travel cost is going to be expensive for anything related to federal government advocacy, given that it's not located in Waterloo.
Can I respond to that, Timmy?
I do know there are the two, so I think
the two, yeah.
Aria?
I was just going to say, if the NIAC delegate becomes the chair of the committee of NIAC, yes, it will be closer to that 15 to 20,000 because they are actually expected to travel everywhere the board goes, which means all the conferences. If the individual, if we just say then, please don't run for the chairship, which also honestly, a student can't do. You got to be a full-time person to be a chair of NIAC. Most chairs of NIAC are either execs or they're hired by the association as a full-time person. The cost should be more minimal if it's only like 2 conferences. But yeah, probably want to bake that in. Don't be chair.
Yeah, thank you. We will go to Scott in a second. Mohammed, is that a tip? Okay. All right. Mohammed, you go.
Just going back to Arya, I mean, I know it might be difficult, but could you ballpark what we're talking about if we're saying 2 conferences and this person is not a chair? Because I mean, if it's a full-time position, I think that from our perspective, that's a bit more difficult to comprehend. But I think what we're looking at is a student doing this part-time. So in that context, what are we looking at? Again, ballpark, preliminary. We're not going to hold you to it.
Well, it's funny, during my year, even the NIAC retreat wasn't really like super mandatory. So, you know, the lobby week isn't really even mandatory either, but like lobby week is 5 days, right? It's going to be in Ottawa. So if they're flying, you got to put the hotel around $300 a day, assuming they get their own room, of course. Times that by 5, maybe times that honestly by 6 or 7, realistically, a day to land and then a day after to fly out. You just gotta, you know, food, you're gonna be doing $20 a meal, 3 meals. So add that. Again, it's expensive. Like I'm not gonna, you know, sugarcoat it. Depends what we want to do, but it's not horrible because if that creates an effective Indigenous advocacy opportunity, it's quite cheap actually for like even 20K if we manage to do, you know, meet that goal. So it's not horrible, but I can't give you a rough number. Sorry, I'm sure we can task Graham to do the math and ask around. My numbers are old.
I'm gonna give it to Skylar if he's going a little bit.
I just wanted to clarify the first point is that my initial point is not that we really need to consider, and that was part of my first point was that we don't balance what the number is here, whatever the compensation is, with yes or no, do we want this delegate? The answer should always be yes. And I think that we're going to get caught up again on how much it's worth. But I just think in terms of framing and all the discussions here that we should all agree unanimously that this is a position we should support. But we need to be obviously financially responsible with how we approach it. So I just wanted to clarify.
I'll pass it to Rory in the room.
I was just gonna give a number.
Oh, you have a number? You cool? Yeah. Okay.
I just booked travel for Calgary and I'm spending about 1,200 on travel. That's not including food, which obviously I'll find out after I've eaten.
So that's for one.
That's for a week in Calgary, one conference.
Including like accommodation.
Yeah, that's
How many days?
5, but they basically very nicely require you to get there a day early.
Yeah.
So 6 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you had your hand up earlier. Are you like, you want that back or?
I guess I can.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you want it or?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so in general, unless they're going to actually be chair of NIAC, which in that case, like if they came forward and said like, hey, I'd be interested, like that might be a further conversation yet. At this point, if we're just going under the assumption that they may or may not go to some conferences, like I think the travel costs are generally going to be minimal. And when it comes to like the honoraria in particular, like rather than doing, math here at the board table, arguing over the specific numbers, like I would honestly just leave it up to the discretion of the officers, though it doesn't get you maybe much further than you initially were here coming in, Rem. But I hope, if you get some of those numbers from the other schools, that can give us an idea of, what they're looking like. And then also considering like other conversations that are also happening at the same time around like Senate. And I know, Mohammed, you're also looking at potentially like at-large members. So like those conversations are also happening in other places. And so if there's any connection that can also take place there.
Yeah. So I will pass to Mohammed. I do want to speak on this. And I do think maybe a more useful discussion, specific numbers would be, do we want this set to like how many conferences you go to or something like that? Or do you want it like it's more of a systemic conversation than a specific number, but like how the honorarium is doled out. I think that's, without having some estimates, might be more useful. Just something to consider. But I'll pass it to Mohammed.
Honestly, I would say, Damien, you probably inspired a point that I'm going to make right now, and then I'll probably make the second point. And so right now, I mean, so university committees, the way they sort of operate is on a meeting-to-meeting basis. They get paid sort of a stipend / honorarium. I know ISAC does it. So, we can look at perhaps making a general sheet of how we want to approach, students who want to go to, conferences that are essential on a WUSA front, perhaps, NIAC conferences and such related. And we can perhaps generate a guideline on how we want to approach costings and sort of honorariums in that sense. Just put guidelines on sort of budgets, right? So if, here's your daily food stipend, here's your, the honorarium you're going to receive for every full day of meetings you attend, or for every maybe perhaps singular meeting you're going to attend. And we can just put that as a general guideline that can guide us on general approaches. And I think that's something we should have, like, regardless, just as a useful document. And so that's the first point. And then second point I want to just raise, and this is sort of directed to Rem, and that is, so on a CASA front, is there any effort to sort of bring meetings on a hybrid model? I mean, these are summing up like generally going to be quite, like, I know this has been done in the past, and I'm not sort of arguing for a shift. So perhaps you can also enlighten me as to sort of the criticality of meeting in person, A, and then B, was there a sort of a shift into sort of optioning into a hybrid model just to allow like universities like ours to avoid paying, tens of thousands of dollars on a year-on-year basis to send delegates on committees, and is there an option to do that on a hybrid? Just out of curiosity. I yield back.
I'll pass this to Ram, and then I do want to quickly ask like a discussional question, and then we'll continue on with the regular.
Sorry, I had an answer to the first question and I forgot what the question is. But I do also have an answer to the second question. But can you remind me what the first question was?
Sure, yeah. So first question was, creating a general guideline, a general sheet encompassing sort of our financial targets for students who want to perhaps go to conferences, generally speaking. So, daily food stipends, put in a document. This is sort of what we're expecting to pay. Stipends based on sort of a day's worth of meetings or perhaps a singular meeting. And that's sort of how university committees do it, is where, for example, Isaac, I gave that reference, if depending on the meeting you attend, you get paid a certain amount. And that's just your sort of honorarium/stipend for just attendance. And that's sort of an approach we can take into sort of how we do comp, as opposed to sort of a flat figure on a monthly basis. We can do it on a meeting-to-meeting basis, which is sort of more refined.
I'm so cooked. Now I've forgotten the second question. Give me like a 3-word
question was gonna go hybrid.
Hybrid, yes, I don't think that's a thing they're trying to do. I think there is a lot of focus on like coming together in person for connections. It's also like a huge networking event. And for the first point, I know we do things a little weirdly here, but generally honoraria are not meant to compensate you for the work and how much work you do. It's supposed to be, hey, thanks for doing all of the work. Here's a bit of money.
Okay, I do want to ask a question to you. Because this is kind of a discussion item for your help. Do you find is there kind of a way like to focus this discussion for your will be helpful to you, or do you find what do you want to know?
Through a point of privilege.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just there's one other part of the question that in the rephrase might have been missed, and that was just like, in your perspective, what's the criticality of in-person meetings? Just like I understand like networking and that not. So like from your perspective, someone who's been, what's the criticality of that? Like how important is it from a perspective of WUSA's front?
I think in terms of whether CASA should focus on the in-person aspect, I don't know. But they definitely do focus on the the things that an in-person event would give you.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you, Damon.
Yeah, now back. So what would you like to kind of get out of this discussion essentially? Like what would be helpful to you, just so we can try and kind of focus it a little bit more?
Right. I mean, the pipe dream was to get a rough number, but the actual hope was to just generally have a discussion on like the direction we kind of want to go, like what. Honestly, I think I wanted to see if board wants to go honorarium as an honorarium or honorarium as compensation, essentially.
Okay, so maybe I could just do a quick straw poll, if that's okay here, just because I think I'm noticing a general consensus. I apologize, you're gonna have to wait. Are we all in favor of kind of compensating for, I just want this very clear, for the travel for the 5 as currently like shown in the list? Can I get it, like just all in favor of that? Okay, so that makes it very clear on that, the compensation aspect. And then all of those in favor of like kind of, there should be an honorarium of some sort for this delegate.
Sorry, I guess the question I wanted to ask was, is the honorarium just a thank you for doing any work at all? Or is the honorarium to compensate for how much work they've done?
Yeah, Sandra, you can go ahead.
An honorarium is what you said first, the second is
but
paying them.
Honorarium.
And you're paying them and then it goes through the normal tax employee, yes, exactly, so those.
Just point of order, I think maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the idea that the current board structure we have with honorariums, we compensation.
Right.
This is kind of what happens, anyways. This is what Rem is asking is like, at the end of the year, do we give them $1,000 as honorarium, or are we paying them monthly, and they have like performance on a review? I know I'm really messing up the wording here, but I believe that was the.
You can always tie an honorarium to some sort of factors, but again, honorarium is not hourly or based on output.
Okay, I will let Samir make his point very quickly, just because I do think it is an interesting one. But then we'll go back to regular discussion.
Not a promise or guarantee. Mike helped brought this up in my chat, and I think it's useful. There are other methods outside the WUSA budget. We EOI has an opportunity section which students already used to apply to for traveling, which is significantly not filled every year. And it is not a promise or guarantee, to be clear. But that is other option. Or there's also, REM has discretionary, that's an option. There's other, we have a normal budget, it's other options.
I should just say the discretionary does not even come close to covering.
True, that's very true.
And yes, it is good. I think it's an important point that it's not a guarantee that can be up in the air, but now we'll go back to regular discussion. It has had his two up for a while, and then I promise we can go back to you, Rem.
I've had it long enough that I don't remember who I'm responding to anymore. But I will note that the document itself, discussing the cost of the delegate, does mention like per diem cost of delegates, which I guess would be sort of equivalent to the honoraria. So that is an approach that we could take. Similarly, I think this was also a 2 on a 2, if that's okay, Daniel. So I think this was to Mohammed, but I don't remember what Mohammed said. It's more to Mohammed because he's also a member of INSHOP. It'll be interesting to look at how societies do these things. Societies like INSHOP do send people to attend conferences, and I've never been to an NSHOP conference, but I know that they do send students in a similar manner who aren't like execs, just members of their council. So yeah.
Okay, Rory.
Okay, I just want to tie this back to the specific thing that I think Rem is asking around, which is whether we pay them with the honoraria model, which is what I would highly recommend, given that it's what's in the document, and it's also what makes most sense, given that it might vary how much work they're going to actually be doing month to month, or even like if they go to the conferences or not. So again, I'm going to loop back to my original recommendation, which is that the officers should take it upon their discretion to sort of come up with an honorary number. And like, as long as that's reasonable, like I'm comfortable with that. I don't think board needs to be sort of splitting hairs on different semantics here.
Sure, I guess I'll ask Rem then, are you comfortable? It seems like from the straw polls, an honoraria is a good idea and compensation for travel is a good idea. And then details can continue to be hashed out, or is there something else you want to know?
No, I'm good with this.
Okay, perfect. I actually don't know the power here, but I will give it to Mohammed and then we'll end it.
So two sort of points. One to Rita. I mean, yes, I did actually want to mention NSHOC and I kind of forgot, it slipped my mind. But so the way NSHOC does it is, you do your application process, usually are accompanied by one executive who's sort of in charge of the group, and NSHOC pays for travel. Usually not flights. Usually we're talking about bus, unless we're talking about to the States, and they pay for food and accommodation. But that's literally it. And I think the idea from NSHOC is the travel. I'm speaking from a purely NSHOC perspective. I'm going to be clear. The idea is that the travel and the experience and the networking is sort of the value that students are getting on their own accord, and so that's sort of the quote unquote compensation that they receive. So that's sort of what the position NSHOC holds. Also, generally it's not within NSHOC's budget to pay on honorarium. They don't do it to execs. I'll put that out there. And then to the point about letting the officers and perhaps I see in the chat ED decide, I would say I think I'm happy with that as long as we're just informed of the final number. So as long as it comes in, on a board chat or in an email that, oh hey, this is the number we stenciled in, I have zero problem with taking this offline and letting officers and ED hash it out.
Is that I can't tell. That's not a motion. Is that
End of discussion?
Well, it's a discussion item, right? So there's no motion.
You can't motion.
Well, do we have a motion during a discussion item?
Good.
Yeah.
We need it.
Yeah. But does anyone feel like it warrants this, or we just go back to status quo as if it didn't come to the board, with extra information for the officers at that point? So.
Had a good discussion.
Yeah.
And I think you've given them direction.
Yeah.
And the board can do that. There really isn't anything, it's black and white. If you're gonna have somebody take on this role, here are the requirements for them doing it. What you end up offering them in terms of an honorarium, that can still come back because you have no idea what the time commitment is going to be.
Yeah.
And for this year in particular, as Rem has said, it's really only 2 activities that they're going to be able to be involved in, potentially.
So I'll just say, because I didn't want to add myself to the queue there, apologies. That my preference for this would be that it kind of returns to status quo with extra information. Rem can sort this out with Suzanne, and then if it does come to a conclusion, if they do come to a conclusion, they can decide whether, like, probably, I would say, have to come to board for an increase like this, but I think that should be fair. I don't know if we need to motion it in any sense, though, any sense here. But Skylar, do you want to?
Just covered it.
Okay. All right. Anything else, or are we good? I think we've covered the main points for Rem that would be helpful for them. Okay, perfect. Well, that's exciting. Let me go back to my agenda over here. So the exciting news, unless I'm going to hear any screams otherwise, is that is everything for the new business section, which means that we move into 6, which is general reports. And we get to start off fun with the executive reports. Suzanne, are you ready to give yours?
Sure.
Perfect. Whenever you're ready.
I'm sure everyone's read it. So just highlights long range plans now up on our website, indigenization action plans up there as well. The other thing, a couple of things that aren't on there that I will also note, in terms of the campus life area, we also have the director of student engagement that is posted. Note that there's also the area manager student groups and the area manager community and events that have gone up, but I just wanted to also highlight that the director role is up. I want to welcome Mike back. It's been off for a little bit. We're super excited to have him back with us. Yay. And I also want to let folks know that Esther has taken on the corporate secretary and in-house legal role. She has recently finished her, recently finished her Governance Professional of Canada designation, as well as she's now a licensed member of the Law Society of Ontario. So very exciting. Congratulations. I think I also mentioned in my report that Marvin's contract finished at the end of June, and so he has moved on as well. We did get news from this morning from Marianne that she is moving on, so I wanted to formally thank her in front of everyone for all of the work that she has done to help support board and all of the committees. Really, really appreciate everything you brought to WUSA, Marianne. So
thank you so much.
Day will be, I believe, July the 21st, and so we'll be connecting with folks to let you know who's going to help cover off what as we work on. We will be posting the governance manager role ASAP. I also want to. Oh, I think the rest that I have is actually in confidential add-on, so I won't say that now. Are there any questions from my report?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Mohammed. Appreciate that.
So I just wanted to confirm, Suzanne. So as just taking on the role of corporate secretary, and so we're seeking a new governance manager. Are we also going to seek a new assistant to the governance manager as well?
We're going to start with governance manager. So we did have a second governance manager with Marvin, and Marvin his contract was finished at the end of June. So we will be posting that and then having a look at the governance department and sorting out what the next step would be past that.
Next is Aria.
I'm just going to ask this question here. Have you folks had any updates on talks with the university on Senator honorarium since last board meeting?
I do just want to say that is part of the president's report. So if you check out the president's report.
Okay, awesome.
I did post written.
For once.
It is in there.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.
There you go.
Next was Samir.
With our, no, I'm gonna ask this question confidential.
Okay.
Great. Just to be safe.
Okay, I've got one for confidential.
Proud of you.
Great. Okay.
Any other questions? Awesome. Okay, so thank you, Suzanne, for your public.
I'll write it down before I forget.
Good. Next on the list is the president's report, which is me. Seems like not everyone has read it, but it's my fault. I posted it like a few hours ago. As I was working it out. Now we'll start with the fun one, which is Senator honorarium. And that's that we do have We did continue to have conversation with the university, and specifically the university secretary on the senator honorarium as was passed at AMM. No decisions were made yet, and it should be noted that the final decision maker is not the university secretary, but they seem willing to kind of have more discussion with us on it. It is not the first time it seems the university secretary has dealt with these questions before in other universities. So we will continue to have those discussions, but I want you to know it is on the debate. Now, there's no commitment to it being financial compensation, but it is still on the table. But we are going to continue to have those discussions. I'll give the question. I think we can do it item by item. I don't know how these reports are usually done, but I think this is how we'll do it. We'll let you ask the senator honorarium, and we'll move on to the next one before we get going. So yes.
Who is the decision maker then?
It was vague. It probably, I know it's higher up. I think this university secretary would probably want to have more discussion to figure that out herself first as well. Yes.
I can't give you a name, but it's just that because it will be an agreement between the university and it would have to go to the administration in some form.
Yeah.
It's probably something to do on the president.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask one more to Mohammed, and I actually did think I changed my mind, and we'll do the whole report and ask more questions. But Mohammed, you go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks, Damon. Just wanted to get an explanation on zero credit courses and co-curricular transcripts.
Zero credit courses is kind of exactly as it sounds. It goes into your transcripts as 0 credits. A co-curricular transcript, I had my own problem. I didn't actually understand it during the meeting. I think it's just something that comes on the side as they would also, whenever requested your transcript and stuff, they could also provide you with this as an official. From my understanding is what it is. Yeah.
So just putting in on the transcript, Senator, 0 credits. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that sounds
simpler.
simple, but that's a 0 credit. Co-curricular is a separate document.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So we'll actually keep moving. Well, there's only one other item. Societies. MASSOC had their president resign, but a new president has been appointed in the interim, which is Alex Lavallee, whose name I should have helpfully pointed out I spelled wrong. But he is the new president for MASSOC. We had a first Council of Presidents meeting with high turnout from the societies, which is an exciting sign. We are likely going to be holding termly sports events between societies, with COPS being the decision maker on what games to hold. So it's an exciting thing that we've had societies point out that they wanted for a while. And staff has pointed out that this wouldn't apparently be too difficult to do. So what we're going to be going forward with doing. I should also say that AFSA has also appointed a new president, which is Rory Norris, who is our own director. So congrats. And that is kind of the end of my public reports. So now I'll take questions generally on the reports. Okay, I don't see any. So we'll move on to the vice president's report.
Okay, so I went to various meetings and events, counting down Ontario AGM, pretty boring. Indigenous Peoples Day event, I gave the opening remarks. It was co-hosted by WUSA and the Office of Indigenous Relations. It was really nice. It was raining, so we moved it inside, which was actually kind of nice because it kind of concentrated the crowd a little more and had more foot traffic. Staff report on rental bylaws was presented at the City of Waterloo Council. So it was actually partially delayed. There was one part that was mostly about short-term rentals and whatnot and didn't really affect students. That part was presented in June. The other part about rental safety was delayed to September. And that's the part that WUSA had been pushing for a little while. Damien was off that day and I was chairing an APC meeting during the council meeting. So we sent Sophia, our co-op student, to speak at council, basically just saying, we're really looking forward to the September report. Damien and I met with university's government relations folks on June 26th, where it was originally intended to just be like meet each other and share our annual priorities, but for obvious reasons, we ended up taking most of the meeting to just talk about Bill 33. More details than that and confidential. Attended the OCC Meet for Directors event as well as the Sparty Pants event. Pretty chill, mostly just social stuff, nothing really board related were brought up. And Damien and I will be meeting with the mayor and the regional chair next week. On the WUSA side, we are now really into the work of drafting this new policy paper. I received research packs from both WUSA and our own research team pretty recently. It's a very interesting topic to research. Most students have no idea what it is and don't really care. So we are having a full day think tank kind of scoping writing session this Thursday. And hopefully that'll give us a better idea of what we want to put in the paper and what kind of research we need to back it up. Damien will also be in Toronto all day with me on Friday for WUSA meetings all day. I think it'll be a really good opportunity to find out more about what the other student associations are thinking about Bill 33 and planning. Yeah, more on that in confidential. Indigenous student recruitment. Yes, so as I mentioned before, we're kind of in a really good opportunity we've just launched our own plan, and a lot of the external organizations we're a part of are also really focusing on Indigenous issues this year. CASA's always focusing on it, but we just joined CASA, so I have delegated my co-op student to basically come up with all of the information, put together a doc to work with our comms team to develop advertising material for recruiting for these positions. Unfortunately, the Office of Indigenous Relations comms team is just one person who's fully booked until September. So we'll be doing all of the work and they'll just review it. But yeah, I'm really hopeful this will actually get somewhere. And then APC, very proud of APC. I made APC meet twice in the last month because we weren't able to meet before the first board meeting. And I wanted to make some decisions before this one. We did end up deciding on the advocacy position statement, which we just passed in consent agenda. And once they're done, the full papers will be reviewed and passed by board. We also discussed some feedback on the new gender-based and sexual violence alleged against students policy. Thank you, Katie, for liaising with that and everything. Unfortunately, the people who were talking to us about that mixed up the APC meeting on Monday and the 3AC meeting on Tuesday and said yes to both of us, thinking they were one committee. And honestly, it was a little bit awkward to have two entirely different groups of people discuss the same thing and then basically come up with the same recommendations. Yeah. Anyway, I do hope that APC and 3AC can kind of discuss things a little more when we're just basically doing the same thing sometimes. We also discussed some advocacy strategies on the referendum results. Actually came up with some stuff, which is very nice. We're hoping to invite the task forces to our next committee meeting. What? Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the notifications. Anyway, yeah, so the task forces actually promised a timeline, and the timeline included in June and July, we will update the timeline and give you a better timeline. So now that it is June/July, we would like to invite the task forces and ask them what's up with the timelines. And hopefully that will also help us identify other units at the university who are responsible for actually implementing the changes and see who are the right ones to invite to future APC meetings. Also in the consent agenda, you may have seen that there were some committee membership changes. APC also hasn't been an active member, but we haven't yet moved to replace them. Miscellaneous, Damien and I are doing time tracking now, I guess.
Thank you, Rep. I saw Skylar with a 2 for some reason. Okay, perfect. Okay, any questions for Rem?
Just a comment if I can make.
Go ahead.
The student co-op student did an amazing job. She was very poised. She represented you very, very well. We're not allowed to clap in chambers, but they would clap. She did great.
Thank you. That's good. Yeah, no, Sophia has been a very good, very effective co-op student. So very impressed. Any questions for Rem? Okay, cool. With that done, we do move into directors, but I do want to add a clarification for the directors thing and a reminder that certain aspects of director work is confidential. There will be a chance if you want to dig into certain aspects of time tracking and board reports that aren't confidential, that will be in the confidential session. There will be an opportunity for that. So if you're going to use this area, it's more about if you think there's something that board should know, as a reminder, that board should know, then here's where you can discuss it. But I wouldn't go into what you did the whole month. So that's the clarification that I want to make. I will interrupt you if I feel like you're not doing that, just for time's sake. So would anybody like to speak today? I know there's some CE stuff that might be worth when it comes to the co-op stuff. That doesn't mean you should speak because it might be confidential. Yeah, we'll go to Rida first.
This is a very small one. It's sort of just soliciting, not necessarily in the meeting, but afterwards, ideas and opinions. I spoke with Damien briefly about 3AC and the fact that we have committee membership that never attends because they're at other campuses. And so looking for ideas to sort of engage them, whether that be like finding ways to get them here, us maybe visiting them. I don't know if we have other committees with similar issues in terms of having members like all the way in Stratford or Cambridge or whatever. But if people have any ideas, I'm open to them just after the meeting because I don't want to take up too much time here.
Yeah, it is worth noting. I think the whole of our, get to the second area, the whole of our board of directors is on main campus. So it makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to reach out to the other ones. So advice is always very helpful. I'll go to Aria.
Everybody got emails today for a town hall on July 21st. So if you can please respond yes or no, that'll help our team out to know what to prep. Thank you.
I will know that Katie gave a recommendation online about a GBDA lunch on main campus. But yeah, always open to suggestions. Yes, Rory.
Sorry, you said the 22nd? All right.
No, it's on the 21st.
Mohammed, is this Mohammed, go ahead.
Yeah, just talking about governance reform, because that's, I think, something brought up in AMM. So from a member's perspective, maybe useful to know. So yeah, governance committee officially started. The gov reform timeline, as you paid attention, if you did, with the work plan in phase 1, we're looking to round off the phase at our next meeting, which should be around 23rd July, and we're hoping to start phase 2, which is options development. And so within that, we're looking at alternate governance structures, trying to just piece together other ideas that we should consider as part of this process, where we collate a bunch of different items and sort of look at them. If anyone watching, or perhaps board members specifically, have ideas that they'd like to share, perhaps not able to make the meeting, I'd urge you to contact me privately. We can set up a one-on-one and we can talk about it, because I know there are people that might have concerns, and we can talk about it, get it through. I can get your perspectives. I can make sure they're brought up in meeting, and that just means that we spend less time arguing on board about nitty-gritty items. That's generally what I wanted to say.
Anything else board related? Yes, Rory.
Pieces, the first of which, I don't know, Damon, you haven't really mentioned yet this meeting, but I know in chat earlier you said the seat on EdTech was now available.
Yes.
For general people to think about. It's only probably been a couple hours since you sent that message, but just wanting to remind people to maybe consider that as a possibility of something that they might be interested in, to probably reach out to you directly. the best action there. And then I guess sort of a broader conversation that I'd like to have, very short at this point. I was talking with Damien just before the meeting around sort of hour tracking and things like that. And recognizing the fact that I don't want to make this meeting much longer than it already is, just to be prepared for further conversations in the future. Now that we have, continuous data sort of rolling in as people submit their hour tracking monthly, like we've already seen in the first, show between May and June, the hours that people report. And so just in general, like just trying to collate it here. And I don't have Rita's full information, but when it comes to like in May, the average director did around 44 hours. We're in June now, that went down to 31.
Okay, well, the numbers, just because some of those numbers aren't confidential.
Oh,
As it currently stands.
So
Interesting.
I guess then this is a broader conversation, I think, that we also had before the meeting of like, I know there's like two different philosophies of like ways of looking at this. Like, is it the board who's supposed to keep each other accountable, which is my purview, or the way I would look at it? Or is it like the elector's job to keep the board accountable as elected positions? And my argument here is basically going to be, and again, like no decision has to be made. Chandler's like rubbing her head, it's making me nervous. So like, I'm not pushing for a decision at this point, but just to have some thought around like, if your philosophy is truly that, oh, it should be up to the electorate to hold us accountable, why then is like hour tracking and stuff like that still confidential? Like arguably then the electors ought to know that information to be able to best hold you accountable. And then the other piece of like, if it's truly like board who's supposed to be holding each other accountable, then I'm sure we might have confidential, but there's a piece to be had of like, well, we're 2 months in now and already starting to see some trends, and I don't want that to continue. And there's broader conversations to be had. Again, summer semester, maybe there's less university committees taking place and different pieces there. But I think, again, like these broader conversations should be happening at board.
Thank you. And like Rory was saying, this will be brought, the indication here is that it will be brought for a discussion in the future. It is not currently a discussion item today, so we will not be discussing it. So I do want to make sure that we're not getting into the details with the question that's about to come up. But thank you, Rory, for, you did talk to me about if he could indicate that here. But yes, Skylar, just making sure we don't get into discussion here, but go ahead.
And to Rory's point, and just for the record as well, I think that it's important to note that a lot of these trends from the first month to now, June, is that there's also a clear discrepancy.
Once again, specific numbers are in conflict.
Yeah, there's a clear discrepancy in between which directors are doing way more work, like 60-hour months or more or less, but around there. And then also directors who are doing, half that, a third of that, month back to back. So I just want to put that out there as well, because those are all public now as well, I assume. So
They're not public now. I think, it's public from time tracking.
oh, it's in our
From my understanding, no.
Some things are.
So some things are, Mohammed, yeah, go ahead. I thought the Tom had decided that it just wouldn't be.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so essentially, just to round out the discussion, I think perhaps it wasn't clear. So essentially, this discussion was sort of prompted recently when Imprint reached out for a statement, and we sort of discussed this in the sidelines, me, Damien, and Esther. I think the outcome was that the time tracking sheet itself, so the time log, that is going to be confidential just based on the fact that, from respect of director privacy, obviously we can jump more into it, especially if we feel that from an accountability perspective, it's not working. But I mean, from a board transparency perspective, it's much better than what we previously had, where the time tracking sheet is just general, week by week data across like a number of line items. So it's generally more transparent in that perspective, but we can talk about how good it is from an accountability prerogative. So that's one component. And so the outcome I took away was that that sheet itself is going to be not publicized, but obviously there's a larger emphasis. I think this was mentioned in the motion, larger emphasis on director reports. So I don't know if you guys read mine, but I try to make them very meticulous and encompass sort of everything I do on a monthly basis. And that is sort of what we want the public to see, where they can try to understand the scope of what we're doing. I think we can have that discussion, like you said, Rory, definitely if we feel it's not working. But from my perspective and sort of the perspective of the motion that came through from governance committee, those sheets were never intended to be publicized. only the director reports.
My understanding is no numbers on that stuff.
Point of order.
Is it okay if we just, go on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say they're in our agenda and public documents folder on the SharePoint, so it's,
Our internal SharePoint isn't.
yeah, just.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. That could add some confusion there. So for the future, we'll make sure it's in the right folder. I guess if I could just ask a very concise to Esther, is that okay? That on, when we're talking about, from my understanding, maybe confirm or deny, the board reports outside of that confidential section, because there is a confidential section in the reports, those are public, but all numbers on specific time tracking is confidential. Correct. Okay, that's my understanding. So we'll be careful with the numbers there. I saw 3 from Rory. I assume that's down now. Perfect. Mohammed, go ahead. But once again,
Sorry,
not,
there was-
not discussion on the item. Just right now, we're just
Yes.
clarifying.
No, this is just an update I forgot to provide in the context of the item itself, and that was I actually had prepared a amendment to the motion we discussed during the last meeting, which was a monthly time tracking log. It was collated, so essentially it would be, rather than what we had right now, where it was a week by week basis. This was a general month scope, which would just outline the general activities and sort of total hours committed. So I had that prepared in case discussion arose regarding that topic, but since nothing came up, that never came to discussion. And so I think we can take this discussion offline and probably try and get an understanding of what board members thought they were voting on, and then we can move forward from there.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm not going to be taking more discussion on that, because it's not a discussion piece. Any other aspects of reports? Okay, cool. That's awesome. So I guess with that, we get to move into confidential sessions, or take a few seconds to move into that. And then I'll just wait for staff to let 3AC actually takes like because the meetings are so long. Yeah. Oh, we're out. Okay, perfect. With us being out, I'll just say in confidential session, no motions were passed, just reports. So, with that being said, we are going to be adjourning the meeting at,
Just a point of privilege, there was that one motion passed, the invest
oh, okay, yeah, but yes, there was, okay.
directive.
There was, yeah, there was a quest, yeah, that's what we say. There's a request, there was a directive to staff to make a report. We won't go into details on that report, but it was passed, I believe. What was it? What was the final? Two against?
Two votes against, two votes
Two
against.
votes, two votes against, everyone else for. No, one abstention. Correct. Thank you. Sorry, it's been a long meeting. But with that being said,
Good night, no.
we will be adjourning at 10:07 PM. Thank you so much, guys.
Good night, Jeff, as well. I'm sorry you messed with me. He's like, where are you?
Oh, right.
Did I vote against?
You're 3 hours late. Where are you?
Kidding?
Have a good evening, everyone.
Jeff is messaging me like, where are you? He's like, I have cake, and I'm like,
For one of them and voted against.